Hello, I am so excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite meals, brunch. But not just any brunch, one fit for a king, literally, King Henry VIII to be exact. Hey there, I'm Sohla el-waylly, and this is Ancient Recipes with Sohla. In each episode, we take a dish you may recognize and attempt to recreate one of the oldest versions of it to ever exist. So it's a little cooking, a little history, and a whole lot of me. What's not to love? If you're familiar with King Henry VIII, then it'll come as no surprise that his brunches were big and lavish and included everything from lamb to venison to swan, ox, geese, duck, porpoise, and like so much beer and wine, never ending, bottomless. Since we don't have nearly enough time to make everything that was on his brunch menu, we're gonna make two popular recipes that come from a cookbook that was released near the end of his reign: a decadent dessert, Hippocras jelly, and a staple entree, Pie of Aloes of lamb. This pie is different from anything we've made on Ancient Recipes. It has a hole at the top, and then we're gonna pour a syrup through the hole after it's baked. But before we dig in, let's brush up on a little King Henry VIII history. Who was this guy anyways? King Henry VIII is often seen as a gluttonous tyrant who loved to eat, drink, party, and of course, chop off people's heads. But that is really only focused on the latter half of his reign. While he had everything a ruthless king could ask for, what he really longed for was a male heir to his throne. He married 6 times, searching for a son. His first marriage and annulment led to the creation of the Church of England. The rest of his marriages ended in divorce, natural deaths, or beheadings, ordered by him, of course. He had 3 legitimate children, and yes, one was a son, Edward VI. He was crowned king at just 9 years old, but died of illness at age 15. The other 2, Mary I and Elizabeth I, would each take their turn as England's monarch. King Henry VIII died at age 55, obese and riddled with health problems, but his influence lived on for centuries. All right, enough talking, let's get cooking. We're gonna start with the Hippocras jelly. But what the heck is that? In short, it's a mulled wine, and we're gonna set it into a jelly. So we're gonna start by extracting some gelatin from these calves hooves and veal shoulder. And then once that's gonna simmer away for a long time, and once we know we've gotten all that collagen gelatin extracted from it, you know when everything gets really tender and falls apart. We're gonna strain it then and season it up with sugar, cinnamon, and ginger for those mulled wine vibes. And then traditionally, it would have been dyed with something called turnsole berries. We weren't able to find that, so we're gonna go with a little bit of food coloring. All right, so I'm gonna get the calf's feed in the pot. I've already got a gallon of water here, and in you go. Feet are always filled with a lot of collagen and connective tissue, so they are a great thing to extract gelatin from. I love making my chicken stock with chicken feet if I want it to be like really wiggly and thick, which is perfect for pan sauces. Now we're gonna add our veal shoulder, another excellent source of gelatin. Now I'm wondering though, is this gonna taste like meaty? Because nowadays when you make a sweet jelly, it's usually with unflavored gelatin, and then it's really just about the juice and the sugar and whatever else you add to it. But I'm gonna just taste the meat. Veal is super mild, you know, at least it's not like, we're not boiling venison here. But I don't know, I'm interested to see how this ends up tasting. So these recipes come from a cookbook published in 1545, 2 years before King Henry VIII died. It was called A Proper New Book of Cookery. All right, here's our wine. You ready for this? Boom. Now I'm gonna let this jelly simmer until it's really nice and tender, and then we're gonna finish it up with our spices and sugar. My Hippocras jelly is simmering away behind me, and I'm gonna get started on the Pie of Aloes. Aloes means any kind of meat thing that's rolled up. So they had beef aloes, lamb aloes, mutton aloes. We're going with mutton. And the filling here is gonna have hard-boiled eggs, sauteed herbs, and dried fruit. I haven't seen like hard-boiled eggs used like this. I feel like when you overcook an egg, because this egg is already like totally cooked, and then it's gonna cook again inside the rolls, the aloes. I wonder if it's gonna get really like eggy. You know how that can happen when you cook your eggs forever? So I'm really interested to see how this tastes because, I don't know. I don't really think of egg yolks as an ingredient when they're cooked like this, but we'll see. So I'm gonna start by smushing it around. Now into this bowl, I'm gonna add my smushed egg yolks. They're gonna get further smushed. It's kind of like deviled egg, except it's going inside of meat. Meat deviled eggs. All of it. Now half of this filling is gonna end up inside of our aloes, and then half is just going on top of the pie. Now here I have some thyme and parsley that we just sauteed until it wilted just a bit. And now here are some raisins and dates. So this is gonna be interesting, like a little sweet, savory kind of vibe. And we're gonna mix this all together with a little bit of salt to taste, and that's gonna be my filling for the aloes. Aloes like this were sometimes cooked in a pie, or sometimes just cooked on their own. You know, meat with stuff rolled up inside of it. I feel like we still do rolled up meat kind of things, right? Like, oh, what's that one where you put butter inside a chicken? That's kind of like rolled up. What is that? Kiev, chicken Kiev. We should do the history of chicken Kiev. Oh, are there any like rolled up meat things that you want to see us make? Let us know, because I feel like I've seen this kind of thing happen in a lot of different cultures, and it makes sense because it's a good way to tenderize a tough cut, which is what we're going to be doing today, and you can also kind of stretch your meat with your filling. I don't think King Henry VIII was worried about stretching meat, though. This was probably more an aesthetic choice. The rolling up of the aloes is like a little bit fussy, so I wonder if that's going to make a difference in the pie, if it's going to be worth it, or if we could have just like layered it all together. A little bit more salt. So there isn't any salt going directly on the mutton. The salt is just coming from what we're seasoning up right now, so I want to make sure this is a bit aggressive, because this is going to be seasoning up the whole thing. Okay, filling is good to go. Now I'm going to start by slicing our leg of mutton into thin slices, like a little scallopini situation. Where do we begin? Here, let's start here. This feels good. So the grain is going this way, so we want to go against the grain so we have nice tender pieces. And it didn't say exactly how big to slice it, so we'll just see. We might have to like butterfly some of the pieces. I think we want them to be like nice and even. Let's see, first slice, this is never great. By butterflying, I mean like you could take this piece and make it even thinner by splitting it open. So like this piece isn't that pretty because it's the first one, but you can still use it if you split it open. And then maybe we can roll this up. I've never cooked mutton shoulder like this, so I'm interested to see how it's gonna taste. See, like here, we're a little bit thick, but we can just butterfly it open. I'm not sure how many aloes we're gonna need to fill the pie, but I have a feeling I'm not gonna use the whole leg of mutton. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of filling to me. So brunch, as we know it today, wasn't really around back then. People would usually eat only 2 meals a day. The first meal of the day was actually dinner at about 10 or 11 a.m., which is right around the time our brunch usually starts. The second meal was called supper, and that happens around 4 or 5 p.m. During the Tudor reign, breakfast became much more common. The hours of dinner started shifting back to what would be our modern lunchtime because people needed an earlier meal in the day. Slice. Okay, I think this is my last slice. I feel like I have enough to roll up enough aloes to fill our pie. We can save this mutton for braising, you know? I'm sure there's another ancient recipe we can use it for. Okay, so I've got my slice. I'm gonna go for like a tablespoon of this filling, because remember, we wanna save half of this to put on top. So we're not gonna need a whole lot. And I'm just gonna roll it up, set it aside, and we're just gonna keep going until I have like a pie's worth of aloes. Why don't we go, let's go assembly line style, efficiency. Let me get my favorite aloes. Oh, that's a good one, whoa. Dang. Did they know about assembly lines back then though? No, right? People were making 1 aloe at a time. So this perception of King Henry VIII being this gluttonous, crazy ruler is actually a little bit misleading. That was the latter half of his years. In the beginning, people thought he was cultured, handsome, and happily married. It wasn't until the second half of his reign that he started getting violent, erratic, and start binge eating and drinking. Some people suggest a jousting injury caused brain damage, and that's the reason why. But That's hotly debated. Okay, I think this is enough to fill our pie, so let's make our pie dough. Now I'm gonna make the pie crust for our aloes. We're going for a hot water crust. We've made one of these before for the apple pie. This is a very sturdy crust, nice and crisp. Ooh, okay. That held together really well. So it's gonna have lard, egg yolk, and be kneaded together. It's also gonna be formed while it's warm, which is why I made the aloes first. So let's get in there. First thing, flour, a little bit of salt, and I'm gonna fork whisk this together. I also have a real fork, but this is working for me.
Finger whisk.
Finger whisk. I don't even remember the names for my own tools. Okay, activate finger whisk. We're gonna whisk together our salt and flour. You know, combining your dry, it actually takes longer than you think. You're like, oh, but it's white on white, it's mixed. No, it's not. Next, I'm gonna add 1 egg yolk and some lard. This is gonna make sure it's really nice and tender. Ooh, that's a nice sunny egg yolk, probably fresh from the farm. Whoops, a little dry. Okay, and here I have some melted lard. Lard firms up really quickly, so it makes sense that we would use it for a hot water dough. I think cold water would just make it seize. There were actually pretty strict laws on who could eat breakfast and who couldn't. These sumptuary laws extended to what people in various classes could eat or spend on food. It's crazy. Why do you get to decide? This has quite a bit of fat, so I hope it's gonna be nice and tender. I'm trying to get all the fat and egg yolk evenly distributed before I add the hot water. Now, this is one of the more lavish meals we're making. I really like this whole banquet feast situation we're gonna have. Is there any other like ancient banquet or feast you wanna see us try out? Let me know. It's fun to see what royalty used to do. I guess it's still kind of fun to see what royalty does now. Okay, that seems really nicely mixed. And now I'm gonna add just enough hot water to bring this together, and we're gonna knead this into a dough. And then we're gonna get right to forming. I used to always hate hot water crust, but I never really made them until this show. It was just like, in theory, I'm like, oh, this isn't gonna be as good as a flaky pie crust. But now that I've made them here, they're really growing on me. It's like a totally different texture. It's more of like a cookie. It's more like crumbly than flaky. And I think for savory foods, it's pretty perfect. I think I've got enough water. Let me try and knead right now really quick. I don't wanna overdo it because we want the dough to hold together. It's gonna be like a galette, but we're almost covering the whole thing. And then there's gonna be a little hole at the top where we're gonna pour syrup. Yes, we nailed the hydration. Great job, everybody. Getting those last bits, boom. Okay, so I'm gonna gently knead this to bring it together. There's so much lard, it's still gonna be tender. And I think the yolk is mostly here for color. So I'm just trying to knead this until it gets smooth. We're almost there. You just want it to make sure that everything comes together so when we roll it out, it doesn't like get brittle and crack. Now, the cool thing about these hot water doughs is they're so oily that you don't really need to use any flour when you're rolling them out because they're just kind of like non-stick. Okay, now I'm gonna try and roll this out. I want my final pie to be about 9 inches, like after we fold everything. So I wanna have about 4 inches extending past the 9. So that's 8 plus 9, 17 inches is what we're going for. Did they use inches back then? Was there another unit of measure? Is it like, I don't know. How many decapitated heads long? So you want to rotate after every few turns just to make sure that your pie isn't sticking. I worked somewhere where I had to make 50 tarte tatins a day, and my forearms were bruised because I would roll them like this with all of my strength. Oof, okay. This feels good to me. All right, so let's arrange our aloes in the pie. I'm gonna outline my circle first with some aloes. Cool. Let's tuck these guys in. Look at that. That's pretty cute. Okay, so here is the remaining filling. You know, those hard-boiled eggs with the raisins and dates, and we're gonna pop this right on top. Cover all of our aloes. Now, this flavor combo right here, yeah, that doesn't seem crazy. But now it's gonna get a little weird. We're gonna finish it up by sprinkling it with some sugar. This is gonna be very sweet, because we got dried fruit, sugar. We're gonna add a syrup to this. I don't know. Then some cinnamon. And to like really let the world know that you have made it, you're a king, we're just gonna garnish with saffron threads, which is like, I've never seen this in a recipe. I would never ever do this in real life. This is not a great use of saffron because without like hydrating it first, we're gonna lose all the aroma. I mean, unless they just put all of it in there. That's all I feel comfortable doing. I'm really interested to see how these flavors come together. Now we're gonna kind of pleat it. A lot like a galette, like one panel at a time. Get these nice folds, leaving a hole in the middle so we can pour that syrup on the top. Final fold is always the hardest. Okay, pie, did it. Now, I'm gonna just lift this, see how sturdy this dough is, wild. Right onto our baking dish, and we're gonna bake this until it's nicely golden, our aloes are cooked through, and then we're gonna pour the syrup on top. In the meantime, I'm gonna head back to strain my Hippocras jelly, and we're gonna make that syrup. Our calf's feet and veal have been simmering away. They look really wiggly and tender, so now I'm gonna strain. Okay, big lift. Sohla strong. So you can see everything just totally fell apart, and that's how you know it's given us all it's got. And now it's time to season it up. Okay, so sugar. So this is gonna be sweet meat jelly. Yum. Exciting. Now, we're gonna add a little bit of cinnamon and ginger. Hippocras was actually considered quite regal, mainly because of the spices in it. In the medieval ages, spices were very expensive. It was considered a drink for after having a lavish meal, you know, to help with digestion. So we think King Henry probably had a lot of this stuff. And then later it was used to set into a jelly to have in between courses. Spices, ploop. Let's stir these in. It's warm, so the sugar will dissolve pretty quickly. Now, they would have dyed this blue with something called turnsole berries, which we weren't able to find. So instead, we're gonna use a little bit of food coloring. Oops, oh gosh, maybe too much? Let's see where that takes us. Kind of hard to gauge how dark it is looking into this like pit. No, oh, we could go further. Oh, I guess we need a lot of dye. I wonder if the dye is supposed to give you more of that like wine vibe, because it is like, it starts off as a drink. Really hammer home. I'm gonna keep going. We want this a regal purple, right? So now this looks like a really nice shade of purple. I'm gonna strain it into these glasses to set. Now we don't know exactly what kind of dishes they would have set these in, so we're taking an educated guess. This feels very regal. That's a nice shade of purple. I do wonder how blue the turnsole berries are because there's not a lot of like blue things out there. Now I'm gonna let these jellies set and we're gonna move on to making the syrup for the Pie of Aloes. Our jelly is setting, our pie is baking, and now I'm gonna make the syrup that's gonna go into the hole and into the pie. This is an interesting syrup. So we start with white wine as our liquid. Sweeten it up with some sugar. And then some spices, because we're royal. A little ginger and cinnamon. And now it gets interesting. We're also gonna add a piece of stale bread. I've never made a syrup like this, but I imagine it's gonna help give it some body, and I'm really interested to see how this tastes. I hope it gets like, I don't know, a little toasty maybe? I think like bread sauce is kind of cool though. There are sweet and savory chefs out there doing things with like bread sauce. There is a traditional Italian bread sauce too. Oh, it's so good. Okay, we're gonna let this simmer until the sugar dissolves and the bread gets mushy, and then I'm gonna strain it. At this time, easily grown produce was considered food for the poor, things like cabbage and beans. But fruits and veggies did make their appearance at King Henry's feasts, things like asparagus and artichokes. King Henry steered clear of all of these things, except for strawberries. He loved strawberries. I'm gonna let my syrup cook until the sugar's dissolved and the bread is nice and soft, and then we're gonna strain it and it's on to the tasting. Okay, it's time to brunch. Finally here. So we've got our Hippocras jelly, which is nice and set and wiggly, and we've let our pie cool just a bit, and now I'm gonna pour that syrup we made. So this has wine, that toasted bread, some cinnamon and ginger, and we're just going in. I've never made a pie like this, so, woo. Hey, gonna wait, let it settle, let it soak. I'm really interested to see what the syrup does. It got really nice and thick from the bread, so that's good. I feel like this pie might be sweeter than some of the dessert pies we made on the show because we've got the dates and the raisins and sugar in the pie, and then we're adding a syrup. Like, whoa. They really wanted you to know they could afford that sugar. Let me tilt it around, maybe we can, yes. Sneak it in and around those edges. This is definitely a very, very, very sturdy crust. It's that hot water crust. You could I feel like we could throw this around the room and it would not shatter. I'm curious to see what mutton is gonna taste like with this much sugar. I think the main thing that I'm curious about are the hard-boiled eggs. There are some French recipes that use hard-boiled eggs, but it's not something you see a lot at all in modern cooking, so. Okay, that feels good. Let's cut in here and see how it looks. Oh yeah, it's really nice and tender. Like a sablé almost. You can just see it's like already crumbling as soon as I put my knife in. We got some good flaky action. All right. Huh? Whoops. But see, it's fine. It's so sturdy. I just lost a little bit of egg yolk. I'll just pop it in there. Okay. Wow. Okay. Really sturdy. We can see those rolls, the little spirals of the aloes. You can see those herbs cooked down even more, and they're really nice and like melty. The egg yolk is still like, nothing like melted, it's all intact, and the syrup just made it a little bit moist. Okay, let me dig in. That's actually pretty good. I thought this was gonna be terrible. Not terrible. It's crazy to me how many times that happens where it's a wild combination and somehow it works. The mutton got really nice and tender. Didn't overcook though. Like, it's in a good place. The herbs are the biggest thing that hits me. I'm getting a lot of thyme and I like it. It's definitely sweet and savory, but in like a really interesting way. The crust looks so tough, but it's really nice and tender. It's pretty good. It's a combo I've never had before. I can't really explain it. I'm getting like spanakopita vibes mixed with biryani, because it has the warm spice situation with the cinnamon and the saffron. And then you have lots of cooked herbs, which, you know, cooked herbs have a very specific cooked down taste. Weird, kind of cool. Whoa, I thought this was gonna be terrible. Now let's try the jelly. So, really wiggly and set just like gelatin you buy from the store, which makes sense because gelatin comes from calf's feet. I'm wondering, am I gonna taste the veal? Am I gonna taste the calf's feet? Or is this just gonna be like a texture and it's gonna be more winey? So let's get in and give it a taste. Nice wiggle, really nice jiggle. I don't like this as much. The texture's really nice. It melts in your mouth immediately. There's something weird. It's just like watered down wine with like a hint of meat. So I didn't see that coming. I don't love that. but I do see how it would be a good palate cleanser if everything else on the buffet is really heavy. I guess this does feel like pretty decadent. It's more about like the presentation. When you cut into the pie and you see the little spirals, that feels like someone really took a lot of time on this. The jellies in the glasses, it feels really like fancy. I think by today's brunches standards, maybe not so fancy, but I get it. I think this would also go really well with like a mug of ale or wine, because this is so heavy. You really want to rinse it down with like, you want that like bitter, hoppy beer situation. So I can see how you could just do this all day, bottomless. This was fun. This pie was actually surprisingly good. I really liked the sweet savory combination with the herbs and all the dried fruit and the syrup. And the jelly, cool texture, maybe a little bit bland. But overall, it was really cool to see what King Henry VIII would have brunched on. So if you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. And if there's any ancient or vintage recipe you want to see me try out, drop it in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.